Now we can get moving on to the back and actually attaching it. First thing is to get the guitar back in the mold. Make sure we get back with the back. Make sure that our we're going to start attaching it to the correct side. Now I've got the rims back in the mold, and we really want to keep those about halfway, out either side. If we can keep them consistent, we'll do a better job of keeping our radius, because as you move the rims one way or the other, the stresses are going to change the angle of these sides, and we want to keep those as consistent as possible. Now we have the back. I'm going to put this in the radius dish and re-sand this radius, because as you remember, we have these kerfings proud, and we want to get those back to the level that the blocks are at. Not necessarily the sides. It's okay if they're still proud of the sides a little bit, but we want to make sure that we're down to the blocks and that we have that radius back in this. So you can see we're taking quite a bit material off of those linings, off the kerfing, but we haven't yet started to get back to the tail block. The end block, I think we're pretty close. I'm going to mark them with this white pencil. Almost have the tail block done, but the heel block has a little bit to go. That looks to be it. Now you might have some little peelings all along your kerfing. Go ahead and get those cleaned up out of there. You don't need those getting in the way when we're gluing. I'm going to mark these one more time. Pencil. And the pencil's gone with just those few strokes. So we're set. Now for this next step, I do want to switch out my radius blocks. I want to go from the sanding block to, or I should say sanding dish, to the smooth dish. If you just have one of these, then you can lay something on top of this, like parchment paper or a very, very thin pad. Now I am setting the sides onto the back, and I am looking to make sure that my centers are lined up. I want to make sure that the center of my end wedge is lined up with the center of that reinforcement strip, or the center line of the back. In this particular one, it's hard to see, but if I marked it with a white pencil, that would improve things. Here, I do have the center of that reinforcement strip marked, and I do have the back, center line of the back marked right there. But I want to bring that over here. and mark that out. When lining things up to attach the back, it's really best to kind of just mark the centers of everything. Your back, the end graft, the reinforcement strip. Really, just everything you can to make sure that we can line this up wherever we need to. I think I've got that close. I'm going to rotate it around. Check out end here. Now that I've got this, everything centered up, I want to mark where I have the tail block onto the reinforcement strip and the heel block on the reinforcement strip. I'll mark those and then I can slice those off in a moment. We also want to take a look while this is centered where the braces exit the sides. And here you can see where we've got the braces exiting the sides. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark on this side and this side where those exit. I'm going to do that for each of these braces, and then we can come back and start cutting them in that 2.5 millimeters so that we can set the sides onto the back. And here, although it's not going to be as visible, I am going to do this with a mechanical pencil because I do want this line to be as exact as possible. Here I've got my mark, and I'm actually going to cut just to the inside of this pencil line. I do not want any gap whatsoever between the strip and the blocks. So I'm set my razor on it, creep up to it. Just pressing the chisel into that same cut slot. And I don't want to tap this into place like I'm actually chiseling something. I'm just trying to slice those fibers. Because remember, the back is only 2.5 millimeters. And stress is like chopping it or tapping a chisel into it with a mallet or hammer. It's going to be pretty traumatic. And I've got quite a bit of glue left over, so let's scrape that off of there. Happy with that. Now the heel block. This is pretty much scraped off. Now, to get to the braces. And then we need to get back to the center reinforcement strip and mark our center lines so that when the guitar body goes back over the top, that we have a good line to match up to. Now the heel block already had a line on it, and we're going to leave that, but here we need to reference the end wedge and put that line back on the inside and draw that up just a little bit so we can see it over the top of that center reinforcement strip. Once we have all of our center lines marked again, we can now start to cut the channels for the back bracing. We'll just transfer the lines up from the sides and mark those onto the kerfing in the sides. I like to use a straight edge, small straight edge ruler for at least the upper bout and the waist to get those marked perfectly across and try to line them up with each other. Because these two on the upper bout and the waist, we're going to be able to see straight through the sound hole. So we really want to try to do a good job of keeping those as straight as we possibly can. Mark one side. Mark the other. And then move up to the waist and mark those lines. Again, we're transferring these lines up from the sides that we marked onto the kerfing. I'm going to do that on both sides. And then use the straight edge to make sure that your line goes across the guitar. Because of the way that the curves work and everything, it's really easy to get thrown off and draw your line perpendicular to the sides, but we want to draw it straight across from the other one. And you can use, again, about any cutting tool that you want to cut the channels in. I like to use the Dozuki or really any back saw that's got some support so we are cutting nice straight lines. And I always use some sort of guide, whether it's a wood block or the ruler or whatever it is. And you can freehand it and assume that you know where that 2.5 millimeters is, or you can use some sort of a guide or take the measurement or really whatever you would like. Just keep in mind that if your cuts go too deep, you're going to be able to see those channels on the interior of the kerfing, and it may look like a mistake later. If your cuts aren't going back and forth and they're kind of going side to side a little bit, your channels are going to be off. So make sure you're following that straight edge or your guide as much as you possibly can. Keep those sawing motions nice and straight. And you certainly can freehand them, but having a straight edge guide, some sort of cutting guide, is incredibly helpful. And here I've got the sanding jig that I set up to actually sand the height of the braces as they came in. So I'm going to set this Dremel up on this. And that should get me exactly where I want to be. What I can do is do a sample, do a test cut through a scrap like this. Okay, so it looks like it's not quite high enough, which is fine, because I can come back in and just touch up the bottom of that with a squared off file and really get that exactly where we want. The last thing I want to do is overcut on the Dremel and cause us problems where we have to add material, which is just not going to happen. All right. I'm coming in from here, and then before I come out the other side, I'll actually pull up, come here, and then come in. Just so that I'm not tearing things out. I want to come in from each side. I think it works much better that way, and I get less blowout. See how close we get. In here, not quite wide enough in a couple spots, so coming through, and I've lined up my heel block and tail block on the center reinforcement strip, make sure everything's lined up correctly. And now I am marking where I have to go just a touch wider. Alright, so I've done my widths all the way around. I've made those changes. Now I'll flip it back over and make those cuts. Now when I'm making these wider, I can use the razor, I can use a chisel, I can go back to the saw, but when we're just taking off a little bit of width, the saw can get a little squirrely and get one way or the other and get us off track. I would prefer really just to use the razor. Now this one is actually quite a bit larger, and I can get the blade in and have material on both sides of it, so I'm okay using it for this particular one. Okay, things are looking good. I like the way all the joints are looking. Everything's pretty clean and tight. The last two things that I want to do before I get to gluing the back on is that I want to quickly radius the top, which I now have down in the 30-foot radius dish, because I want to lay the top down in the go bar deck, and so I want something to reference that to. So let's get this radiused. I've done a little bit on the top where I think I'm good, but I am going to double check it quickly with the chalk method. That is good. Okay, now I got it. I'm going to vacuum this out. I like to vacuum all the way around so I can get the dust out of the gaps in the kerfing as well. And the very last thing I'm going to do before I put it in the go bar deck and start clamping is do a double check. Putting my big floodlight in there. And you can see that when I push this part down, I'm running into some resistance there. So I have a depth issue that didn't show up until I ran the floodlight behind it. I've got depth right there and depth a little bit right there that I need to address real quick. It's only about 0.5 millimeter. It looks worse because of that giant floodlight behind it, but that's exactly why I do it. So I'm going to address those and check one more time. There's my floodlight, and all those gaps are now taken care of. Everything's good, and I am ready to go. Let's get this thing glued up. I have my 30-foot radius dish in the go bar deck because I want to put that guitar face down, backside up. And I'm looking to make sure that everything's lined up in the back. Okay. Now what we're going to do is apply our glue. And when we get to these joints where the back braces are coming through, we want to make sure we get the sides as well as the bottom of that channel. And the same theory on the squeeze out kind of holds true still. A little bit is fine. A lot is not. So we don't have to be real sparing about the glue application, but we don't want to have so much in there that we get all these big lines of glue running down the inside, because that is not good. I'm going to push it towards the outside, so that is going to be much easier to clean up. I want to get a little bit of glue right here where the block meets the reinforcement strip. So I have a solid connection there. And when this goes in, we want it to be pretty close to dead on right when we drop it on. We don't want to push this around and have it skating around all over and spreading that glue where it doesn't need to spread. Okay, center line looks good back here. And now we can start dropping these bars on here. Want to keep the go bars right above the kerfing. Yeah. All right, things are looking good. I'm going to leave this clamped up for about 25 minutes and pull the bars out quickly and make sure we can clean up any squeeze out on the inside. It's been about 25 minutes, so I am going to take these off And let's take a look inside. See what kind of cleanup we have to do. All right, not too much squeeze out to speak of. Just a few spots, mostly on the blocks. Couple on the braces. Perfect. Now is the time to attack those while they're still a little bit gummy, gooey. Pretty minor stuff. Exactly what I would hope to see. The back is now out of the clamps. All the squeeze out is cleaned up. There's a little dust we can pick up in there, make it a little cleaner. I'm going to leave it in the mold, but I'm going to leave the spreaders out because once we get that top on, there's really no way to get those spreaders out. Unless you use the smaller ones that have 1, 2, 3 different spreaders, then you possibly can, although you would need to double check that, pass them through a sound hole and make sure. It's really not a huge problem to leave those out at this point, and I think we are ready to move on and start working on the top. We'll see you in the next chapter.